the best intro music I've ever gotten. And I don't think that I could have ever given this keynote at a more perfect conference with the theme. I'm like, how do I get these honeycombs home with me? Because this is amazing. So my name is Leigh-Kathryn Bonner. I'm the founder and CEO of Be Downtown, and I'm so excited to be here with you guys today. There is something so special about a good storyteller. A good storyteller knows how to captivate you. They know how to have you sitting on the edge of your seat with your eyes up, phone down. Sadly, storytellers these days are few and far between. Luckily, I come from a family of some of the best storytellers. We're in the South, right? Storytellers in the South are the absolute best storytellers. And I love my family. Because growing up, I got to see my grandfather and my uncle and my mom and all of her brothers. They all would tell these stories that you could listen to 50 times in a row and still be on the edge of your seat just waiting for them to tell it again. You've seen the progression of it go from like a not super extravagant story to over the years being this like insane story and fishtail that never actually happened, but you still love the story no matter what. My Uncle G, he's a master beekeeper. He is one of the highest-ranking beekeepers in the country. He is one of the best storytellers I've ever met. If you just look at this man, you know that he has some stories up his sleeve. Or folded tightly in the front bib of his overall. When people see us, they say, "You're not related." And my uncle's like, "It's a good thing we don't look alike, because I'd be an ugly girl, and she does not look like me at all." And so my uncle has always taught me what it means to have a craft in telling a story. And I love that so much about my family. There's another storyteller that I have come to know and that I've fallen deeply in love with over the last 4 years, especially, of my life. And that storyteller is the honeybee. You see, Mother Nature is our best and oldest storyteller. She tells her story with her whole heart. She cannot be rushed. And she paints us the most beautiful of pictures with her story. One of Mother Nature's best storyteller is the honeybee. Honeybees have been around for over 110 million years. They've been around much longer than us. They will be around much later than us. But the honeybees, the secret is to stop and to listen to all that they will whisper around us. To best tell their story, though, I need to tell you a little bit about mine. Because we all know the story of honeybee decline. But there's another story that the bees have been teaching me and my team over the last, especially 2 years, that we are excited to be officially launching in the spring. So at Be Downtown, one of the things that we talk about most and that we've built the BDT Leadership Institute off of is biomimicry. So honeybees are responsible for every third bite of food that we eat. 70 of the world's top 100 food crops come from honeybees. North Carolina was built on agriculture. We have the largest beekeepers association in the country. But just this past year, honeybees had the worst year on record for the last 16 years. They're dying around the world at alarming rates, and we categorize this as the 4 Ps. It's pest, poor management, poor nutrition, and pesticides. And we're losing these honeybees, and they are such great storytellers because they are an indicator species. They are the canary in the coal mine. We can look at the health of the honeybee population and understand the overall health of our environment at a much faster pace. And because the honeybees are dying, it's time that we stop and listen to the story that they need to tell us and that they're trying to tell us with all of their might. I first fell in love with honeybees. There we go. I first fell in love, I come from 4 generations of beekeepers, but I didn't fall in love with the honeybees until my freshman year at NC State University, where I took Introduction to Bees and Beekeeping, because I wasn't very good at science, and I knew the professor knew my grandpa, and my uncle took the course a generation before me with the same professor, and I was like, this is my best chance of getting an A in a science class at NC State University. So I'm taking Bees and Beekeeping. Best class I ever took at NC State. And I fell in love with the honeybees, because the way the professor spoke, he spoke about bees in a way that if you just look at all of the little things they do, the ripple effect is something so much greater than you could ever imagine. And that connected with me. as somebody young in college trying to find myself and find what I want to do, and always having a passion for helping others and wanting to have a job in my life that made a difference in the world, looking at the honeybees as a way to do that, as an analogy for what you do, how you can be a good leader. So I asked, well, I wanted a beehive at my apartment complex, and the company that I was in, my apartment complex said nope. I was like, I'm on the 3rd floor, it'll be fine. Nobody else, the bees will be flying, it's okay. And they absolutely no. So I went to the American Tobacco campus in Durham, North Carolina. I was interning there, and I asked the owners of the campus if I could put a beehive on their rooftop, because studies show that honeybees thrive in urban environments. They have stable living conditions. They've got a diversity of food source. They're not nearly as stressed out as they are for large-scale agricultural populations of bees. And the owners of the American Tobacco campus said, sure, this campus was built on agriculture. Bring the bees. It's where Burt's Bees World headquarters is as well, and Burt's didn't have bees at the headquarters, so we brought the bees to Burt's. And it started to snowball, and people were like, what is this weird little girl doing putting beehives on rooftops where 1.8 million people visit every year? And it's working, right? We want bees. This is cool. Many of you are thinking, how in the world did this girl get the companies to say yes to putting tens of thousands of flying, stinging darts on corporate campuses? We haven't had a problem yet. It's okay. So we brought the bees to American Tobacco campus. We started with 3 beehives and 2 companies, Burt's Bees and American Tobacco. And over the last 4 years, we now have over 250 hives with more than 50 corporations in North Carolina and Atlanta, Georgia. And we'll be expanding again this year. We started bringing the bees, people started hearing about it, and originally it was just putting bees on the campuses, that was it. And then employees fell in love with the bees, and they wanted to take classes, and they wanted to learn how to be beekeepers themselves. They wanted to learn about how the honey works. They wanted to learn about how the bees fly. And so we created what is now Bee Downtown. As any startup, it morphs and changes, but at Bee Downtown, we install and maintain beehives on corporate campuses. And we use those hives to facilitate year-round employee engagement and leader development programming, which is why it's perfect to have you guys here today for the Be a Leader Conference. It's right up Bee Downtown's alley. And so we started working with businesses, and we started adding employee engagement at a time where there's very little at a time in which we don't have many people, or what is the word? Y'all, what's the word I'm trying to say? Help me out here. So right now, when companies are trying to retain employees, there we go. When companies are trying to retain employees, right, they want to find a great place, they want to be a great place for their employees to work, because employees are out, and they always say millennials are job hopping, right? Millennials go from job to job to job. I don't think that's a bad thing. I think millennials are saying, this is what our standard is for the place in which we want to work, or we spend most of our living hours, breathing hours, and we want to work somewhere that brings us joy. So companies are starting to find ways to be able to offer that, and the bees come to the campuses, and the employees fall in love with the bees. I would have never guessed that we would have brought bees to these campuses. The day I sold beehives to the owner of the New York Stock Exchange, Jeffrey Sprecher, who is the CEO of Intercontinental Exchange, ICE, I called my grandpa up and I was like, Papa, I just sold beehives to the owner of the New York Stock Exchange. My grandpa's a farmer from eastern North Carolina and 85 years old, and so he can't hear worth a lick. And he says, Leigh, and I'm like, Papa, I just sold beehives to the owner of the New York Stock Exchange. Dead silence. I'm like, Papa, did you hear me? Quiet. He goes, I done died and been resurrected in my church pew choir practice. You sold bees to who? Because for an eastern North Carolina farmer that has spent his whole life working for so little, he could not imagine that the New York Stock Exchange would be interested in bees. But they were. And all these companies started hearing that all the other companies were getting bees, and then they all wanted bees, and so it grew. And many of these executives are beekeepers already. It's an easy sell when you walk into a business. And the CEO of Chick-fil-A, Dan Cathy, is a beekeeper. The CEO of Georgia World Congress Center is a beekeeper. The CEO of Invesco and his wife are beekeepers. Damon John of Shark Tank is a beekeeper. Morgan Freeman is a beekeeper. Everybody's a beekeeper. We can give the Illuminati an absolute run for their money. There are beekeepers everywhere. It's an absolute underground tunnel. And the thing is that if you look at an effective leader, or if you looked at an effective corporation, they look very similar to an effective and organized beehive. What looks like tens of thousands of moving parts is actually controlled chaos. There's patterns, there's efficiencies, there's beauty, and there's opportunity when you know what to look for. So we built the BDT Leadership Institute. It's a story that the bees told us, that the bees wanted us to share, not the story of their decline, but a story of hope. So today I stand before you as a modern-day Lorax. However, instead of speaking for the trees, I'm speaking for the bees. We built the BDT Leadership Institute with retired Colonel Joseph LaBeouf. He's Professor Emeritus of Duke University. He still teaches at West Point. He's West Point faculty. He has his PhD in organizational psychology and leadership from Georgia Tech. And his wife is a brigadier general, so he says he knows where he stands in the house and in his work life. And we've been building this for about 2 years, and it's all based in a field of study called biomimicry, where we look at naturally occurring processes to solve real-world problems. Ours is leadership. So the first analogy, we've got a whole set of courses that people can apply and take classes in with us that companies can bring their entire teams into, and we have a whole slew of classes, and they're all based off of bees. Bees are not threatening. They're the pandas of the insect world. People love learning about bees, and if you can teach leadership through something that brings people joy and leaves them in a sense of awe, it's a moment that matters, that sticks in their life for a very long time. So the bees are a fantastic teaching tool for leader development. The first one, it's not bee having, it's beekeeping. There are really good beekeepers. My Uncle Jerry is a very good beekeeper. There are also very bad bee havers. A beekeeper understands that it is something that you have to study, that you have to work towards your entire life, that you have mentors, and that you're always working the hive and your hands are in it because you care deeply about it. A bee haver is somebody that has a beehive, they know the hive's there, but their hive is typically going to die every year because they're not putting the effort into making it thrive that they need to. A good beekeeper will pour everything into helping their hive succeed, and sometimes Mother Nature takes its course and it just doesn't work. And the beekeeper feels that loss deeply. It doesn't matter if it wasn't their fault. It still hurts if there's a loss of that hive. A bee haver is almost always going to lose their hive, and when you talk to them, they say, "It was out of my control. I'll get another hive next year." And when we look at effective leaders feel like the beekeeper feels. They do everything. They pour their heart and their soul into their teams and into their communities, into their job. And if something goes wrong, they feel that loss deeply. They feel that accountability and the responsibility. When we look at leaders as a whole, we want the leaders to be the bee havers. One of our courses is called The Beekeeper's Promise, and what you basically just heard today from everyone is them sharing their beekeeper promise. We didn't want it to be, when we built this course, a course about your philosophy as a leader. What we wanted is for everyone in this room to be able to go around the table and be able to share what their promise is as a leader, because a beekeeper makes a promise to the hive. Every beekeeper's promise is different, but they're making an intentional promise to the hive, and every time they step up to the hive, they work the hive that way. Think about yourself right now. Could you, if you had to go around the table, could you share with people what your leader promise is? A quick promise, because a promise, we don't want to be the person that breaks the promise. And leadership is hard and it's inconvenient, and it takes integrity and it takes courage and it takes intentionality to figure out what your promise. Mine is from Cinderella. I'm not original. It's from Cinderella. It's have courage and be kind. Every situation that I can walk into, I can remember and tell myself, have courage and be kind. Next one is citizenship behavior. It's something that a lot of people have talked about today, and what type of business, or beesness, as I like to call it, would we be if we didn't have bee puns throughout this? So behavior, citizenship behavior. This is one of my favorite things to see in the beehive. It's called festooning. So depending on how old a honeybee is, to the day it has specific job designations. So I know one of the things that is on your bullet pointed list is having the division of labor and diversity of jobs in the hive. The bees have that. And the bees are not micromanaging. So what they're doing when they're festooning in a hive is they're literally holding hands and building bridges throughout their beehive to pass beeswax across the hive to build their honeycomb, to build their hive. It's really cool to see. And they have these jobs, but what we look at when we see teams and leaders and what's happening when a hive is crashing is it's typically the 5 dysfunctions of a team. If you haven't read that book yet, it's a fantastic book for you to read. And when you have the 5 dysfunctions of a team, you don't have much trust in your team. Honeybees have trust. It's inherent in their hive at this point because they've been around for so long and they're so good at what they do. But the five functions that a hive has that it does so well are typically what we see causing our own organizations to crash. So citizenship behavior. The girl bees, these are all pictures of worker bees. The girl bees, worker bees, boy bees do nothing in the beehive. The girls do it all. Yes, ladies. The boy bees, yeah, the girl bees do it all. And then there's the queen, Beyonce, that's in the beehive. But they all have designated jobs, and they're doing those jobs, and there's no micromanaging in the hive. They're not turning backwards and saying, what are you doing? Are you doing what you're supposed to be doing? Because I'm not going to do what I'm supposed to do until you do what you're supposed to do. They don't do that in a beehive. They have stuff to do. They got honey to make, okay? They got time to walk around and ask each other what's going on. So they just do their jobs, and when they turn a certain day, they move to the next job. If something happens in the hive also, they leave the most dangerous job, the riskiest job, for the oldest bees. So the bees move through jobs of risk, and their jobs get riskier and riskier as they get older. And if something happens and they lose a lot of bees in the beehive, if a beekeeper comes and messes up a hive, or if a bear comes and tears a hive apart and they lose a lot of the younger bees, the older bees revert back to the younger bees' jobs. They still know how to do them. They don't do them as well, but they still know how to do it because they support the hive. It works the opposite way, too, that they can move bees through the system faster of a colony to be able to support the colony if they need to be moved through. And typically, honestly, if you think about it, it's great that this conference is about leadership because we don't typically start to teach people and have them start to work through their leadership promises and who they want to be as a leader until it's time for them to be a leader. And that doesn't make sense, right? They're already behind the 8 ball if you've done it that way. You should always be building up the leaders and the people, and typically it's not until 30 that you're put in that first role where you're supposed to be the leader. But you can be practicing and learning about the leader you want to become through that entirety of the process, but oh yeah, okay. I'll take that clap, thanks girl. All right. Yeah, didn't know I was gonna get clapped for that one, but that's sweet. And so as we need to be building people up along the ranks the whole time. You have to be intentional about that, and you have to look and say, I know that you can do this, and I'm going to support you along the way. That is what a good leader does. It's what everybody at the table was talking about. Cultivating collective compassion. This is my favorite one. It's the tiny astronauts. I mean, I'm not getting an awe for this slide. Look at them. They're 4, okay? They're 4 years old. And this is the only school we work with. But we won't ever stop working with this school because these kids love the bees. We've never had a kid too scared to go into the beehive at the end of the year when they're grown-ups because they're 4 at the end of the year. They're at 3 years old, they're too little, but at 4, they're good to go. They can't hold the gloves with their hands, so they hold their hands out like this and walk towards the bees and hold frames, and they love the bees. They learn so much from the bees. The teachers have said that that's the easiest way for them to teach the kids anything during the years, to just try to find a way to relate it to the bees because they love them so much at their preschool. Cultivating collective compassion. You cannot and you will not be an effective leader if you cannot lead with a servant's heart that cares more about the environment, the people within it, and your community than your own personal gain. You cannot be an effective leader without a servant's heart. Honeybees, one of my favorite, the way a honeybee hive works is that the colony can't stay within the hive, right? The hive has to go out. They have to go and positively impact over 18,000 acres of their surrounding community. From the minute the hives go in at Delta Airlines or at this preschool or at MetLife and Cary, the hives start to positively impact the community. What if we did that? What if every action we took was for the good of the hive, for the greater good of our community? My favorite word to describe community well-being is the word cultivate. I love it because it's an agricultural word. But if you look at the root of the word, it means a deep sense of adoration. It means to deeply adore something. Honeybees actually don't live long enough to see the fruits of their labor. Their life cycle's too fast. 6 to 8 weeks, they literally work themselves to death. Their wings start to break down. They can't get back to the hive. Well, they're off on a foraging trip. But they're doing all of the work because they know that it supports the hive in the future and that without their work, the hive will not survive. Because what we see with good, effective leaders, good, effective organizations that are growing right now are the ones that care. that give to their communities, that give back to their employees, that invest in those relationships, because, and multiple people have said it, good leaders care about relationships. And when we look at our communities and the beehives and cultivating these communities, these compassionate communities, those are the businesses that we see growing. The businesses that take and take and take and don't ever turn back and say, what can I do to give back to you, are not thriving anymore. They're crashing. That's what we call a hive that is not going to make it. They're crashing. There's too many external factors that are pulling this hive in different directions, and the bees can't continue to do their good work. That's one of my favorites. That's a family. It's the Replogle family, and they're at their apiary in North Carolina Museum of Art. He was the CEO of Burt's Bees when Burt's Bees sold. And when I met with him one day and talked to him, he said, the work that you're doing, I don't know how it's working, first off. How are you getting these companies to say yes to this? But he's saying that every time somebody steps in and talks to Bee Downtown, experiences Bee Downtown, they come out of it with joy. And that's what I love about Bee Downtown, is that our goal at our company is to be like the honeybees, is to leave everything we touch better than how we found it. Everything a honeybee touches, it leaves better than how they found it. They have these micro interactions over and over each and every day. In a colony of 65,000 bees, one honeybee can have 1,200 pollination events per day. 1,200. We see the honeybees around sometimes. A lot of times we notice them when they're a nuisance to us and we don't want them in our way. But it's impossible for us not to step outside and see the collective impact that the honeybees have made in our environment. These micro moments. And in our lives, there's so many moments that matter. In our leadership journeys, there are so many moments that matter, that mold us and shape us into the leaders that we are becoming and the leaders we want to be. But it is a journey. There's a ripple effect that comes with the honeybees of the work that they do. We see it outside. You know, they say today that children can recognize 10,000 corporate logos before they can name 10 trees in their surrounding environment. What? I challenge you guys today, in the next week, to try to name 10 trees as you walk outside, because I think it's adults too. But we look at these bees and what seems insignificant, and oftentimes in our own leadership journeys, we say, well, I'm trying my best. I'm working so hard to try to invest in my team right now, or our team just worked so hard on this project and our company didn't seem to care. And oftentimes these moments seem very insignificant, but you never know what you do in your leadership journey, the way you act in a time that is not as exciting as you would have hoped that it would be. You're not getting the results that you wanted. Your reaction to that, the way you present yourself in a situation that's difficult, people are watching. And there may be somebody younger than you, there may be somebody older than you that sees that moment of you stepping up and being a good leader. Or of you, when your team wins, saying, we're going to celebrate today. We're going to stop and we are going to celebrate this win. Somebody's going to see that moment, and that's going to matter to somebody in their life. So at times where you're exhausted and you're tired and you just think this journey is just beating you back and forth, where you can't move forward, know that the way you present yourself to your hive, people are watching. And the actions you take can have the same ripple effect. One honeybee by herself makes 1/12 of a teaspoon of honey in her whole life. 1/12 of a teaspoon of honey, not tablespoon, teaspoon of honey in her whole life. But together a hive can generate over 100 pounds of honey in a matter of months. So what if we, as a community, worked together like a hive to create the lasting change in the world that we all want to be a part of? The analogies that we've built at the BDT Leadership Institute, which is a secondary division of Bee Downtown, these analogies are meant to stick with you. They're meant to be a moment that matters in your life. You put on a beekeeping suit. You work a hive with us. You're in awe from start to finish in the experience. And it leaves a moment in your life that you remember, that you can share that story with for people in your life and your family and your work life. But I encourage everyone and I challenge everyone to start to ask people here, what is a moment that matters in your life? Get to know people. Build your community. Build your hive here. Support one another. The beehive is supporting the colony at all times. I'll leave you with one last note, and then I'll go. Well, I'll talk the ears off of Billy Goat about bees. But my hope is that you go out and you leave a lasting impact in the world that's positive. That in every action you take, in every business meeting that you walk into, and every time you leave a situation that you think to yourself, I'm going to be a little bit like a honeybee today, and I'm going to leave it better than how I found it. Because that is how we lead with a servant's heart. That is how we create a lasting change in the world. And that is how we build effective leaders that are good role models for others as they're becoming and starting their leadership journeys as well. So thank you for your time today. I appreciate you sharing it with me. And I think we're good. Are we good? Are we good, people? You've been sitting a while. I've been walking around. I'm like, oh, my legs feel great. Y'all are ready to get up. So thank you. It is great to be here today, and I'll be around after if anybody has any questions about bees.